Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Chronic Fatigue and Burnout Recovery podcast. In this episode, I want to talk about privilege and healing. Because whether we like it or not, in our healing journey, we will have certain privileges ourselves, or we may see people that we deem to have more privilege than what we do. And sometimes we can use that as fuel for the I'm not going to be able to do this fire. And so what I'd really like to do in this episode today is just call out the privileges. Call out the privileges that other people have. Call out the privileges that I have had in my own fatigue recovery journey. But also call out where you may be lacking in privilege to give that weight, to give that validity. And also, I guess, offer up the opportunity for you to still move forward in your journey despite any disadvantages that you may have. So this episode could possibly be triggering, and if that's the case for you, I will invite you just to slow down, take your time with it. Know that if it's bringing anything up for you, there's an opportunity there for a little bit of learning, and there's an opportunity there for a little bit of growth, whether that is anger, sadness, grief, frustration at anything I have to share. But also to take your time. We can only process things, we can only move through things at a pace that our nervous system has capacity for. So if your capacity is low right now and you don't necessarily have the capacity for this conversation, that's okay. But I thought it was an interesting topic to raise. There have been a few situations where I have been engaging with clients and on social media where this idea of privilege has been coming up. And I thought it was maybe something that we should just bring into the light and have a conversation about. So I'll lead by saying, first and foremost, that privilege is something that can affect your healing journey. And some people will have more privileges in their healing journey, which may make the perception of the healing journey easier, and some people may have less privileges in their healing journey, which may make the perception of the healing journey harder. But I'm sure anybody who has had or experienced a chronic illness or moved through some sort of healing journey will agree is that it's still hard. Whatever level of advantage or disadvantage you have, it's a painful experience for anyone to go through. And yes, certain advantages make it easier, certain disadvantages make it harder, but it's still painful. And we don't want to take that away from anyone. We don't want to invalidate anyone's pain or say, your pain isn't as bad as my pain because you have these advantages. And we also don't want to place people in a victim box and say, well, you must be struggling so much more because you don't have the advantages that I have. Ultimately, what it all comes down to is the individual's experience and the individual's nervous system. And nervous systems which are resilient and have greater capacity can really handle incredible things. And we know that the nervous system has a capacity to grow and develop and change. And that's really part of what the healing journey is all about. So I'd like to just go into highlighting and sharing some of the different privileges that you may have or other people may have in their healing journeys. So the first one that comes to mind to me is financial resources. It's easier to heal when you have more financial resources for many reasons. For example, more financial resources might mean that you can stop working and you can just be 100% focused on your healing, where I know that there are people who really feel that they need to work or they have to work in order to support themselves financially. And that ultimately means they can be taking on more than what they would ideally want to be taking on, and that can slow down the healing process. But it doesn't mean that healing is unachievable. It just means that maybe it's a bit slower. Having more financial resources, maybe, if you're not going to give up work completely, it might mean that you have the option to work flexibly, or you may have the option to work part-time instead of stick to a full-time role. I know in my healing journey, it's a bit of a double-edged sword maybe, but I had the ability to work flexibly running my own business. I had the ability to control my hours, so that was helpful for my healing journey. But also, because it was my own business, you don't really have, hours on the clock. It's not like a 20-hour week or a 10-hour week and you're done and dusted. When you have your own business, however many hours you work, mentally, you're constantly carrying the load of your own business and the financial pressure to continue to make that business work. So although there were positives or privileges, shall I say, to running my own business, there were also disadvantages, being that you can put in a certain amount of hours, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee financial stability or a specific financial outcome, which makes it hard to plan ahead or commit to things in your healing journey because you're not quite sure what things are going to look like month on month. The other thing that finances affords us is our healthcare. It's probably no secret that you can rack up a lot of medical expenses pretty quickly working on a chronic illness healing journey. Everything from practitioner fees to alternative therapies to private laboratory testing to supplements. And then we also have to consider the cost of not being able to work, or a loss of income, or other things that may be affecting our overall financial status, the inability to grow in your career and perhaps get the pay rise, whatever that may be. So being unwell is, or can be, shall I say, incredibly financially draining. It's draining on our energy, it's draining on our relationships, and it's draining in all aspects of life. And one of those aspects of life is on financial resources. I myself spent a significant amount of money in my own healing journey. Some of that money I think was very well spent and very well invested on my health recovery. And some of that money I could have probably not spent and been a lot better off. So having financial resources available does give you access. It does give you access to maybe the best practitioners, the high quality supplements, the functional testing, the one-on-one therapy instead of just the group program or reading the book or listening to the podcast. So there are privileges that come with having financial resources. And here, if you're somebody who had a lot of savings to draw on, and then you were able to also be supported perhaps financially by a partner or family members during your fatigue recovery, that's a very different picture to somebody who has to support themselves, or possibly even a family, has minimal or little savings and has to continue to work. Those healing journeys are going to look very, very different. But that does not mean that one person can heal and the other person can't heal. It just means that the picture of healing and the journey is going to look very different. So in my own fatigue recovery, I had the privilege, I guess, of having financial resources. To a certain extent, I was able to keep on working. So I was able to work enough to continue to, cover my bills and my mortgage and my food. And I also had savings, which I relied on quite heavily for all the extra stuff. So for all the big investments, and some of those big investments were also in professional trainings, which the average person maybe wouldn't invest in. But I was able to make some significant, important and big investments because I had that safety net of having savings that I could fall back on. That being said, I didn't really get any financial support outside of myself. My family members didn't offer any financial support. I didn't receive any financial support from my husband, apart from obviously continuing to pay his share of the household bills. But I guess perhaps there was, to a certain degree, knowing that I wasn't in it completely alone. If I needed to fall back on someone, that he was there. Although there's a part of me, this highly independent, strong achiever part, that would have been a last resort. There was a part of me that felt very strongly like, no, I have to be able to do this myself. I have to be able to support myself. I can't rely on other people. I can't ask for anything. I can't receive things without having earned it. And, that you can hear is conditioning that I've held on to for a very long time. And, to a certain degree, I'm proud of the fact that I supported myself through this healing journey. But those are also parts of me that maybe actually prevented me healing faster. What if I had just said, I'm letting go. I'm going to let myself be taken care of and allow for more rest and allow for more stress and allow those people to come in and help me and support me, or maybe reach out for more help and support. Could that healing journey have looked different for me? I'll never know, but this is just a little bit of my own personal experience that I'm weaving into the story as we talk about privileges. So I think financial support kind of overlaps with this idea of a support network, because if we have a support network, we can receive support from our support network, whether that is financial support, whether that is emotional support, whether that is, people bringing meals or coming in to do jobs around the house, or, all the different ways we can receive support. Having some sort of support network, feeling like you are held, feeling like you are understood, feeling like there's people you can fall back on and rely on, and there are people who have your back. I think that's really important for a healing journey. And, some people have like incredible support, like family members who understand. I work with some clients who moved back home or moved in with family members, so they can really be supported, in multiple different ways on their journey. But other people don't necessarily have that level of support. In some cases, the person experiencing the illness is actually also the supporter, because they maybe have a partner or a family member who has their own issues. Maybe they're a carer for an elderly parent or an elderly relative. Maybe they have children who are going through their own mental illness or addictions. And there's so many different scenarios in which sometimes the person with the chronic illness is the person who is actually supporting and caring for others in their lives. And it's really difficult for them to drop the ball. So if we can just soften and allow ourselves to receive support, that's the ideal healing scenario. But for the most case, when I think of most of my clients, they're also supporting other people in their lives who need additional support from them. And that's going to create wear and tear. Because if you're looking after someone, if you have lots of responsibilities at home, if you've got children, if you don't have a lot of help and support from friends and family, that's an extra load on your system. That's less time for you to rest. That's less time for you to invest in your healing. And that's ultimately going to impact the healing journey in some way. It's not that you cannot heal, because again, I'm working with clients in all the different scenarios that I've listed to you, and all of them are healing. All of them are healing in their own way, at their own pace, but they are moving forward one step at a time. So where I'll then go from here is to talk a little bit about education. Education is a privilege, and to be educated and to be highly educated is going to be an advantage in your healing journey. So, for example, here I'll say that I was privileged in my healing journey to already be so well educated. I was trained at master's level in personalized nutrition. I had my functional medicine practitioner certification. I had my NLP. I had been doing loads of mindset work. I had my human kinetics, ergonomics, biochemistry background. I had a lot of skills to know how the body works, to know what I needed to ask for when I went to the doctors, to have conversations, to make sure I wasn't medically gaslighted. I had a lot of privilege from an educational standpoint that helped me navigate my journey. I didn't have to work it all out from scratch. But I still had to do research. I still did all the Googling. I still took a lot of wrong turns, still went down a lot of rabbit holes. And I'm so grateful for those experiences, because everything that I went through has made me the practitioner that I am today. But I can only imagine how challenging it must be for somebody who's just become unwell. They don't have the educational background that I have, and now they have to start from scratch and know where to start. And all they're going off of is whatever the doctor is telling them, whatever messaging they're receiving from friends or family. And it's a bit of a minefield to work your way through. And that is why I have this podcast, so that I can help you navigate your journey. It's why I have my blog, and obviously my courses and my one-on-one work as well, for those who want to take it to the next level. But it is such a minefield to really start to unravel all of this, and also unravel it all in a way that is specific to your specific case. And so the more educated you are, that's going to have an impact on your journey, because less wasted time, less wasted energy, less medical gaslighting, and overall you can just get to where you need to go faster with taking less wrong turns. So then other privileges I'd like to talk about here would be nervous system privilege. And I don't even know if nervous system privilege is a term, but it was something that I used to think of myself often in my own healing journey. And I would look at my friends who, for example, have come from really loving, wonderful families, who come from financial stability in their family, who have education, who have just not really had to really ever experience much hardship in life, shall I say. And when I was watching, sort of when you're not well and you're scrolling through social media and you're seeing the highlight reels of everyone else's lives, and you're kind of seeing what your friends are doing and posting about, and you kind of just, that's when I came up with this term of nervous system privilege. And there was definitely a part of me that was angry, like just thinking, well, it's all right for you because, you got a privileged nervous system, was basically what I was thinking. Your nervous system has never had to go through what my nervous system has had to go through. So, of course, your life is going to be easier. And I think it's fair to acknowledge that. I think it's fair to just say, like, my life has been hard. And this journey I'm on is not easy. I think that is very incredibly valid. But we just don't want to get stuck in that story. If we tell ourselves a story, my life has been so hard, this sucks, this is so difficult, this isn't easy, then that will be the experience we continue to create. We want to acknowledge, gosh, my life has been hard. My nervous system has really done an incredible job of getting me this far. And I've developed a lot of coping mechanisms. But now I have the opportunity, with the awareness I have, to choose how I move forward. And that would be a more powerful way to frame this. So when we're looking at nervous system privilege, the first thing I wanted to touch on was this idea of the ACE scores. So ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And basically, there was a study which was done where they investigated childhood trauma, abuse, neglect, and household challenges, and how these experiences then corresponded with later in life health and well-being. And basically, the study showed that those people who had a higher ACE score, so essentially a higher amount of these adverse childhood experiences, were more prone to poor health and chronic disease. And so just for your interest, I'll read out the different ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. So you would score yourself 1 for every one of these experiences that you may have had as a child. So verbal and physical abuse, if you'd experienced that, you would score 1. Sexual abuse, if you experienced that, you score another 1. Emotional neglect, physical neglect, abandonment, divorce, witness to violence and abuse, a family member who is depressed or diagnosed with a mental illness, a family member who is addicted to alcohol or another substance, or a family member who is in prison. So depending on how many of those experiences you had, you'd add them up and then you would get your score. And a higher score would essentially predispose someone to the underlying dysregulation of the nervous system that we know contributes to poor health. However, we also need to take into consideration that nervous system privilege does not only come from people who've experienced these things, or shall I say not experienced these things, but there are many different types of trauma that can leave an imprint on our nervous system. And that can be things like surgeries and medical procedures, invasive procedures, gynecological examinations, poisons or burns, exposure to natural disasters, racial abuse, which I'll talk about in a moment, sexual abuse, which I'll talk about in a moment, bullying, war, terrorism, financial stress, traumatic brain injuries, accidents, divorce, legal issues, or just even as a child, even just lack of emotional attunement, physical touch, unmet needs, even if you wouldn't necessarily have classed your childhood experience in the ACE category, there may have been things that didn't happen in your childhood that should have happened, and that leaves an imprint on your nervous system. So each of us is walking around with this nervous system that has been exposed to all the different experiences that life can throw at us. And some people just had the privilege of having more positive experiences and less challenging experiences, where other people have had the disadvantage of having more challenging experiences, less positive experiences, without the tools and support to navigate those challenging experiences. Because we know we can have challenging experiences, but if we have the tools and support to navigate them, that's actually how we can grow resilience. So if you're somebody who is coming into your chronic healing journey and you have quote nervous system disadvantage, that is potentially going to make it harder, make it take a little longer than someone who's coming into their healing journey with quote nervous system privilege. So we have to understand that, each nervous system is different, and it's so hard to classify. This is not about pointing fingers and going, it's easier for you because your nervous system is like this, or it's harder for me because my nervous system is like this because I've had X, Y, and Z experiences. Part of healing is just meeting yourself where you are. It's reestablishing the connection with your body, with your sensations, with your emotions, with your relationship with yourself, with your relationship with the world, and ultimately your relationship with your chronic illness experience, and building some sort of capacity. And so I don't highlight all this information about the nervous system to give you evidence that it's harder for you than others. What I'm trying to highlight is that when we constantly look outside of ourselves and compare, we distract ourselves from our own healing. And that could potentially be a tool that you are using for self-protection, but in the long term, it's making your healing journey even longer and even harder than what it has to be. So given that I've touched on racial abuse and sexual abuse in some of the nervous system dialogue, that's where I would like to go next, because your race, your color of your skin is going to have an impact on your journey. And we know that if you have white skin, it's just easier because you are living in a system that was designed in a way that keeps you centered. It's not censored, centered. You're in a system that keeps you centered and prioritizes your privilege. Whereas if you are a Black person, if you're a person of color, you're navigating your entire healing journey in a system that is designed to keep you small. It's designed to suppress you. So not only are you navigating recovering from a chronic illness, you are also navigating the terrain of you are navigating the terrain of systemic racism as you try to heal. And this is where the nervous system overlaps with the racial abuse, because somebody who's a person of color or a Black person will probably be experiencing more microaggressions from the healthcare system. They're probably going to experience more medical gaslighting. So they're going to have disadvantages in their healing journey because of the color of their skin. And those disadvantages are going to have an impact on their nervous system, which means that there's less nervous system privilege there. Their nervous system is going to be placed at a greater disadvantage when it comes to healing. And unfortunately, we're in a world at the moment where, yes, things are changing, but they're not changing fast enough. And the reality of the situation is if you are somebody who is white-skinned, you are going to be at an advantage in your healing journey compared to someone with a Black skin or a darker skin tone. In addition to this, we also have the concept of gender and sexual orientation. So similarly, but not the same as the conversation about skin tone, is we know that the system has historically prioritized the white male. So even if you're a white female, and definitely if you're a Black female or a Black person, or a female, a person of color, then you're probably going to have certain disadvantages because you are navigating a system which doesn't center you. Then if we layer onto this your sexual orientation, so, somebody who is heterosexual may have greater advantages than somebody who is homosexual or non-binary or bisexual. So there's lots of different ways in which these our orientations and our gender and our race interweave with the terrain of our nervous system, because there may be bullying because of our gender or sexual orientation. There may be sexual abuse because of our gender or sexual orientation. And there may be just small little microaggressions that are stacking up over time. But all of these things are just another layer that we have to work with as we're healing. And so then the final thing I wanted to touch on is age. Again, we could also kind of maybe layer age into this conversation about, who is centered in our society. Generally, it's, young, beautiful people. The older you get, you're kind of maybe a little bit more, shoved to the side, maybe not seen, not heard, not taken seriously as much. But then there's also this idea that somebody who fell ill 25 years ago, when there wasn't as much information, there wasn't as much support, there wasn't as much acceptance, who has now been unwell for 25 years, that's a lot of conditioning they're going to have. And that's a lot of conditioning of their own belief system about, is it even possible for them to heal if they've been medically gaslighted and put down for 25 years, or tried and failed repetitively for 25 years. That's really going to influence their self-belief. But that self-belief is not only in the brain, it's also in the body. It's about what the body and the nervous system believes is possible. So somebody who is young, maybe somebody who's 25 years old, has a viral illness, is affected by chronic illness now in this day and age, it's going to have a very different experience compared to somebody who had that experience 25 years ago and is now 50 and trying to heal. Because in addition to that, there's also just the loss of neuroplasticity over time. We know that the brain, I think before 40 years of age, I could have that wrong, or maybe it's before 30 years of age, has a lot more neuroplasticity than it does later in life. That's not to say that there's zero neuroplasticity. So again, don't use this as an excuse not to do your best to get well, but just understand that there are extra challenges here and extra disadvantages. So that was everything on my list. If there's something that you feel wasn't here that I should have spoken about, let me know. I can only see what I can see, and there may be some really big things that I missed out. And if that leaves you feeling unseen or unheard for some reason, then I do apologize. But where I would like to kind of wrap up this conversation now is just to talk about, what do we do with all of this that I've shared? I've shared with you that in my journey, I had the privilege of having access to financial resources, being well educated, being able to work flexibly. I'm also white, heterosexual, although I perhaps have some traumas to my nervous system. I would say they're not as bad, perhaps, as maybe some of traumas that other people have had. I don't know. It's really, it's so difficult to compare, and it's not about comparison anyway. But I would say that my nervous system is fairly well supported to a degree. Not that there wasn't stuff that I also needed to work on there. And I also had the support of people around me, although I perhaps didn't have as much support as I would have liked. There was some support there for me as I was recovering in my journey. And also, I started my illness experience when I was 34. So I wasn't old, I wasn't young, somewhere in the middle. But I felt that, there was enough time for me to rely on the resilience of my age, although perhaps I wasn't as resilient as perhaps I would have been in my 20s. So there's a lot of privilege there. And me saying or stating all of that privilege to you doesn't negate the pain of my journey, because it was still a horrible, painful journey that I would never want to have to take again. And yet I am still incredibly grateful for the lessons that I learned, and now how it is driving me forward in my life's purpose, helping other people. So just being aware of our privilege doesn't make our pain invalid. And I don't want you to feel that your pain is being invalidated, because your pain is very real. This is a horrific experience for anyone to have to go through. But what I do want you to take away from this conversation is that there are people with less privilege than you who are healing. And there also are people with more privilege than you who are not healing. And so having privileges gives us advantages. Having disadvantages or being less privileged makes healing harder. But I work with clients in all very challenging situations. And all of these clients are moving forward in their journey because they have decided that they have the ability to heal. And that is the most important thing I'd like you to take away from this episode, is that whatever advantages other people have that you're comparing yourself to, you can still heal. And even though it's hard, and even though you may feel that you've been doing this a long time and you've tried everything, I just want to tell you and promise you that there is a way for you to move forward. And the way that we move forward is by taking our eyes off of what we can't do, or taking our eyes off what other people are doing, and focusing on what is available. What can we do? What is the first step? If you can just take the first step today and take one step forward, and tomorrow take the next step and take that step forward, and stay focused on what is available to your system, what you can do, what resources you do have, and you stay focused on your healing journey, and you believe that it's possible for you, that is how you succeed. You will not succeed if you're looking for reasons not to. As long as you seek reasons, or I would call them excuses, not to heal, not to move forward, you can guarantee that that is a recipe for staying stuck. And I appreciate that part of you that may be seeking reasons to stay stuck, because that is a self-protective part that's perhaps afraid that they'll become disappointed, or maybe even afraid of healing, or what life would be like if this wasn't a problem for you anymore. So my encouragement today is just to maybe take a moment to reflect on your privilege, and also to validate your own disadvantages. And then acknowledging the reality of the situation, think about what is within your control, what is available to you, and how you can continue to move forward on this healing journey. And if there is a part of you that feels like it wants to hold you back and keep you stuck, maybe just spend a little bit of time with that part, not to squash it or push it down or override it with positive thinking, but just to give it a little bit of space to be heard and nurtured and tended to. And then from a place of greater connection, you'll probably have some useful insight that will help you take the next step in your journey. So I hope you have enjoyed this conversation today. As always, if you can leave me a review or share with your chronic illness community, that would be much appreciated. This is a self-funded podcast. I pay for all the editing out of my own pocket, and there are no ads for you to listen to. You can just listen to the whole episode uninterrupted. So your reviews help to keep me going, help to keep the podcast going. So I really appreciate any reviews and any shares you are happy to give today. Have a wonderful fatigue recovery day.